Hey everyone, today I wanted to discuss a kind of lore hypothetical. I thought we could somewhat merge our discussions of the scariest characters with the rivalry video I did a while back, and try to figure out which character each survivor fears the most. Let's get into it. Dwight is a bit of a scaredy cat character, and I think probably fears just about every character in the realm. In a meta sense, I'd say Dredge for its ability to teleport into lockers. However, in a lore sense, I'd probably go with someone quite basically scary like Nemesis, a big, hulking, and unstoppable mass. I think Dwight would find that scary. Meg's main thing is speed, and it's something she holds highly about herself, it seems. Running was always her getaway, but also embodied her greatest achievements, so I think she'd fear some of the fastest characters the most. Either characters like Billy or Blight, or someone who slows her down greatly like Clown. Claudette, as a skilled botanist, I think would fear the Blight the most. As a character who's pushed botany to its limits, she is going to be curious but also fearful, I think, of what Blight has achieved and the possibilities of his power. Jake, I think, would fear someone like Huntress the most. After all, he lived out in the woods for a long time, and I think one of his biggest fears was more than likely tales he may have heard. Huntress, a dangerous and unstoppable killer living in the woods and hunting all in her path. Maybe he heard a different tale for wherever he lived, but I think ultimately he would fear what could possibly lurk in the woods whilst he's alone. I think Huntress embodies that well. Nia, I'm actually going to say, would be her respective character, Nurse. After all, Nia was taken after entering Crotus Pren on a dare. Presumably inside, a fog consumed her, but likely not before she witnessed the remains of Nurse's massacre. That being the place where she was taken from, and seeing the aftermath of that, I think would make her fear Nurse the most. Laurie, I think, will likely be most scared of Dredge. After her encounters with Myers, the human embodiment of evil, I think the next step up for scaring her is probably Dredge, which is a much more grotesque embodiment of evil, and will likely renew her fears. Ace is a weird one because he doesn't seem to particularly fear the bigger, tougher characters, and had many run-ins with debt collectors. He was beaten a bunch, that stuff doesn't faze him. He does coast off of luck, however, so maybe his respective character, Hag, with her hexes, would be his greatest fear in reducing his luck. Bill is a character who probably isn't too fearful of the bigger characters, with him taking down a few tanks on his way out. I honestly think someone like Slinger could be scariest to him. He's survived many of the hardships of his life with use of his rifle, so I think now trapped without one and being hunted by a clearly skilled bounty hunter wielding a rifle would get the greatest fear level out of Bill, as someone in some ways he may see as on par in experience, and so somewhat fearful of his potential. Feng seems to view the realm as a challenge, and so I think the character she would fear the most would be the most challenging one, or the one that is the hardest to overcome, so I'm going with Nurse. David, I think, takes a lot of pride in his strength and physicality, so I think the character he'd fear the most is one that makes him constantly weak. I think he would see characters like Nemesis as a challenge, but I think someone like Plague would maybe be a greater fear for him, being broken and sick. Quentin, I think, is pretty simply Freddy. Freddy would have caused Quentin a bunch of trauma, and he's witnessed Freddy come back to life and relentlessly pursue him and those he cares about. Tapp, I think, would also just be his respective character, Amanda the pig. He does seem to relinquish his obsession over Jigsaw when entering the realm, however, upon seeing Pig once more, I think it will undoubtedly spark something in him, and the memories will return. So I think Pig is his biggest fear, representing his prior failures. Kate is someone who is greatly positive, and I think she would be the most fearful of someone who opposes that and embodies evil. I do think less so someone like Myers or Dredge, but instead a more twisted character like Doctor or Clown would be her greater fear, something more grounded and horrific. Adam, as an intellectual, I think would maybe be the most fearful of someone more intelligent and capable than him. There's a few people, but ultimately I think someone like Wesker, a clear loose cannon who's highly intelligent and genetically enhanced. He'd see as a substantial threat. Jeff I don't think would be scared of Legion. I think he would mostly be saddened by what they became, and likely just become sad because he could have gone down the same path. The scariest killer for him I think would be someone who was overcome by their trauma and transformed into a killer of the realm. Someone like Artist maybe, because she reflects him as an artist also. Maybe even Wraith, as someone who tried to lead an honest life, but was corrupted eventually. I think it's that fear of what he could have become. But I don't think he'd see that with Legion, as in their case they didn't exactly resist. Jane I think would maybe fear someone like Skull Merchant. Merchant after all targets the wealthy, and if Jane had ever caught word of her and the deaths she caused, I do think she would fear her. Alternately, I would say a group like Legion, with them sharing many of her own values, only on the flip side and in a much more twisted way, supporting one another and their misdeeds. Ash has seen a lot in his time, and I don't think there's anything that will completely scare him. Everything he has ever thought though has been beatable by means of chainsaw or boomstick, so I think the ultimate fear for him is when those things, his two best plans, don't work. So I think someone like Sadako or Dredge, therefore. Nancy, I think, probably does fear Demogorgon the most, partly because it took her friend Barb, and partly because it represents the Upside Down, a place which has repeatedly threatened her life and her friends' lives, as well as her hometown of Hawkins. Steve has fought a Demogorgon off with a baseball bat, and by the time he's in the realm, I don't think he's overly fazed by the supernatural. I think he would fear someone much more grounded, and someone with a bigger bat than him, Oni. Yui experiences a stalker in her lore, and it's a big turning point for her, with the creation of the Sakura 7. Therefore, I think she'd probably find a character that is a meticulous stalker, like Ghostface, pretty terrifying, with it reminding her of her past too. Zarina, I think, would fear Night the most. She hates injustice, and in the case of Night, an unstoppable Hulk who cuts through villages on a whim, I think she will hate that, but definitely also fear him, with him being unstoppable in the realm, and her being unable to do anything about it by her means of studying and documentary. Cheryl is a tough one because she's faced down a lot of much more scary stuff already. One thing she definitely still fears within her lore though is Silent Hill, and the memories of it, and so I think simply Pyramid Head would be the character she'd fear. Maybe a bit of a curveball, and a more conceptual thing is that she'd fear Silent Hill or Midwich itself the most. Felix and Élodie, I think, fear the entity primarily, with it taking their parents when they were children, pretty much scarring and changing their lives forever. The closest physical thing that will remind them of the entity in the realm is probably something like Dredge, so I'm going with Dredge. Yun-Jin, I don't think fears Trickster, and is instead very angry with him. She could potentially fear someone like Pyramid Head the most, with her holding back a lot of guilt surrounding her knowing about Trickster but not stopping him in time. Also, the guy's just kinda terrifying. Jill, I think, would be fearful of Blight. After her close run-ins with Nemesis, becoming infected and narrowly surviving, she's going to look at Blight and be somewhat fearful of his mysterious orange serum and the potential of it, particularly if she's seen some of the transformed versions of the other characters within the realm. Leon is his RE2 version. However, if he is to become the same as his RE4 version when in the realm, he wouldn't fear many characters. He fights an alien type character, he fights knights, he fights zombies, BOWs, there's like nothing he hasn't gone against, and he never gets particularly badly injured. I honestly think he would probably fear Nemesis the most. After all, he has a lot of trauma from Raccoon City, and so yeah, I think probably just Nemesis. Something that reminds him of Mr. X. Mikaela, the obvious answer would be Hag, as she wields the power of hexes, which Mikaela is likely very aware of how powerful they can be. She also experienced dreams of the realm prior to coming to it, and witnessed a dark figure hooking her in the basement. This is more than likely Trapper, and so maybe him too. Jonah, I think, would maybe fear Doctor most. After all, discovering the dark side of the CIA was a big deal in his lore, and so I think seeing Doctor who embodies this dark side would make him the scariest. Yoichi, I think, is quite simply Sadako. Even in his lore, he is quite clearly fearful of Sadako's potential, and in general is very traumatized as a result of her killing his parents. Haddie, I think, would likely fear Dredge the most, as the Garden of Joy is where she was investigating when she was taken, and had to relive her trauma. I think Dredge embodying that place will likely make it the scariest thing for her. It's a little hard for anything else to compare for the scariest spot for her, as she's seen a lot of things when peering across the multiverse. Ada manages to keep her cool throughout the many absurdities of Resident Evil and its BOWs. I don't think she's going to fear any of the more human characters, but instead someone supernatural like Pinhead or Pyramid Head. These are characters I think she would see as things she is unable to overcome or defeat, and so she would fear them the most. Rebecca as our medic character I think would find Plague the scariest, as something she can't really counter, heal, or cure, making her the biggest threat, I think. Vittorio, I honestly think, due to his much greater experience of magic and supernatural sights, would be most fearful of something he doesn't understand, which I think is singularity, a case where technology would scare him, as he would have no idea what it was, what with him being from the 1300s. Thalita and Renato I think would simply fear Skull Merchant. She was the character that hunted them before entering the realm, and very near killed them both, and so I think simply that experience will stick with them, and they'll think of her as the reason they are here. Gabriel I would maybe say singularity for. He has a much closer connection to Hux, witnessing its turn and development, and seeing it murder his entire crew. That's not trauma that will suddenly go away. I think as someone from the future, he's also less likely to find the more grounded characters scary. Maybe he'd find Alien scary too. Nicolas Cage is a pretty tough one. He has a few voice line interactions. He seems to find Maya's annoying, he seems to somewhat fear Sadako, but also kind of like her, so that's a strange one to judge. Maybe Sadako, maybe Blight, as that was the role he played that got him here. Ripley, it's almost definitely just the xenomorph. Sure, she overcomes it in the first film, but she's left abandoned in space with her crew dead. I imagine she still greatly fears it, even when equipped with her knowledge of how to overcome it. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and who do you think each survivor would fear the most? Let me know down below. Thanks, and goodbye.